The Bulls versus the Bears. Get in the game. www.tackletrading.com.
Hello everybody, this is Coach D with TackleTrading.com, here to give you a market update shortly after the open. We're about an hour after the open here. And S&P is dropping back. We're in that ascending triangle wedge. Market has not been able to clear that 2119 ballpark. It's struggling to push out there. So what we see in here is as prices approach that resistance zone, we're seeing it drop back down into the trend zone, and volume's lightening up a little bit as it approaches, and that's not uncommon. That's actually quite common when we see this ascending type triangle setup. Now, it can break both ways. Statistically speaking, it's going to break to the upside. According to John Murphy, the great chart pattern guru, it's about a 70% probability. But when we're looking at market all-time highs, it's really got to, you're talking about quite a bit more money. If you were to put this on a linear style scale, just the dollar amount it takes to push, the higher the price gets, is significant. So as we're sitting here, we're just kind of watching this, seeing which way it's going to play out. Let's take a quick look at some of the other major market indexes. Let's look at the indices, is technically the correct term there. So let's look at the NASDAQ. And this is the NQ. Same type scenario, drop down, early morning trading. We'll keep an eye on it. For the bulls, what we'd want to see is that the candlestick end up closing higher. If we can see it produce a longer, lower shadow like we see down in here, those long, lower shadows can be an indication of change in sentiment, so we'd want to see that. For the bears, what we'd want to see is a violation of the trend zone. We'd want to see closes lower. Increasing volume would be a huge point for that. There's a lot of great trading opportunities out there, and NASDAQ, is heavily driven by tech. So if you're looking for tech stocks, tech scenarios, you could look for breakouts in that arena. Let's look at the Dow, and the Dow actually pressured those highs, giving up a little bit of that ground. It's got some overhead resistance. You can see I've got some previously drawn support resistance zones. But it's very similar scenario. And let's take a look at the the Russell. And the Russell is trading here in kind of a trend zone. And it came up and has done kind of a little bearish retracement, almost a kiss goodbye. Not quite perfect, but pretty darn close. In fact, if we were to change time frames on this, you'll actually see here's the M for murder. So there's that M for murder in that ballpark. You'll see that your breakdown and then that retracement, that did come right up into the kiss goodbye zone. If you were to drop down a time frame and look at that intraday, you will be able to see that. Let's change that down into, say, 30 minutes or so. You can see where the breakdown and the retracement. Let's actually back that out a bit. Let's go to 1 hour chart. Here we can see the M for murder, kind of big zone right here, and there's that support resistance zone playing out over here. So this is kind of what we're looking at, that downward drop in price. So that doesn't necessarily mean it's bearish. It can very easily hold that zone, and we'll see some upside candles, and then what you would see in here is an inverted head and shoulders. So it's really kind of a question right now, who's got the get up and go, which side's got the gumption? Are the bulls going to take it? Are we getting nervous? As the old saying goes, in May, walk away. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Let's look at the dollar index. Dollar is pressing slightly lower, kind of continuing that downward move. Key zone here on the UUP, or the dollar index, excuse me, is around 94-ish. And again, that's an average of the dollar against 5 other major currency pairs. But we're seeing that downward pressure right there. And downward dollar would actually be good. We'd probably see things like crude light pop up. So here you kind of see the inverse correlation and that general upward movement in price. I know a lot of you would have positions on instruments like the USO. I'm bullish on the USO myself, looking for that to kind of check off that support resistance zone, and it's trading up in its little trend zone in here. So you got some upward scenarios here. Dollar down, oil and commodities up would be the typical move. Let's take a quick look at the precious metals. Let's look at the gold spot price for gold futures. And you've got yourself a consolidation in here. It's up off the 1150 lows. Inside consolidation, this is really hard to pick direction on. You have to kind of look at the bigger picture, and with the way that the precious metals kind of play out, that's really just inside pressure. And good for things like covered calls. You know, if you're looking at selling premium out there, you might be able to do that in these types of instruments. So keep that in mind. A quick trading idea for you, one that I've had my eye on, that I've got a position on, is when I've been playing short to the downside. And let me kind of show you the technical setup here. Bearish retracement, big gap down on earnings, boom, rallied up, not even filled the gap, kind of double topped and starting to head down again. I'm watching to see if that can get a little momentum to the downside. And good general short setup. Let's take a quick look at what's coming up on the economic calendar, just so you have an idea of what we're looking at. So today we had manufacturing reports come out. We see a slight uptick. The forecast, the previous was 5.5%. The forecast here was for 0.3%. We see a 0.4%, and that's for the GBP. So that's an increase. That's a good sign. Australian dollar annual budget increase. If you want to filter these out, you can do that by coming up here and unchecking the zones that you don't want to see. If you don't want to see Australian news, if you don't want to see Swiss franc news, if you don't want to see the Chinese yen, you want to see Eurozone, Japanese yen, US dollar. Let's throw that out there and kind of look at what we got. Not a lot of major economic news. We got one FOMC member speaking. And let's actually look at the rest of the calendar for the week. And we got bigger events coming out. We got German GDP on Wednesday. That could be something that affects the dollar, affects the euro. U.S. information. You got some core retail sales coming out Wednesday. And that's going to be one of the things that could probably push this market up or down. Got some producers price index and consumer sentiment coming out on Friday. So those will be kind of the key catalysts to look for. Otherwise, it's a pretty quiet week news-wise. These are important numbers to keep in mind, but they're not the major heavy hitters like the FOMC Fed minutes, the actual policy statement, things of that nature. The unemployment report, et cetera, and that actually came out when we looked at it last week. The unemployment report came out favorable, so it's just interesting to see how this is going to play out. Again, just kind of keeping an eye on that, and we'll come back at you with another market update here, and see now we see a little bit of recovery here. In the time that we've been chit-chatting here, we've seen a slight recovery on that S&P. And that may or may not be an indication of who's taking charge, but what it does do is it sets kind of the intraday. Let me go here to the style and the settings real quick. Let's pop that off that right edge here. Let's go give ourselves a little space to the right. And you can actually see where it's set your intraday pivot points, and what that basically creates for you is kind of that these are the thresholds for the day. From the market open, it set a high at 2100 and a low at 2080, and those become kind of your thresholds. Of course, the all-time high is a major threshold, but those are your intraday pivot points. And you're starting to see that, kind of pick up a little bit heavier volume on the upward move than the initial sell-off in the open. That can actually be an indication of strength, and so we'll kind of keep an eye on that. This is Coach D with TackleTrading.com. Make sure you're getting out there and getting in the game.
Get off the sidelines and take control of your financial future at www.tackletrading.com. Get in the game.